Welcome, Campfire Crew. Let's get it on. Boy Scout Lane by Earthbound Angel. In the quiet countryside of Stevens Point, there's a piece of land that is not so quiet. It is Boy Scout Lane, and its legend has been around for years. A brief summary for all who do not know anything about the place. One of the versions of the story that is told is a troop of Boy Scouts on a camping trip were murdered by their bus driver on this isolated road. Another version of the story is that a Boy Scout troop mysteriously disappeared on the road and obviously was never seen again. A third story is that a troop of Boy Scouts were camping here, and some of them were wandering around at night and accidentally dropped a lantern, resulting in a fire that killed the rest of the troop. However, there's no evidence of missing persons or a mass murder or a tragic fire. The road got its name because at one time the Boy Scouts owned the land there and had intentions of building a scout camp, but it never happened. Now that you know the history, I can talk a little bit about our experience. It was a warm July night in 2005. My friend Aaron was visiting my mutual friend Michelle and I up in Stevens Point. Michelle and I had worked at a Boy Scout camp, kind of ironic, huh? That summer, and Aaron was about to bring me back home to Minnesota when the weekend was over. We were bored, so Michelle suggested we go to Boy Scout Lane and do a little investigating. We had gone to a bookstore the day before and found the story in there, and it intrigued us, so soon we were on our way with me in the back seat, video camera in hand. Right when we turned onto the road, we felt uneasy. You know, that dreaded feeling of being watched. Being the young adults we were, we made jokes and tried to shake off that feeling. We went down the road and turned around. Nothing special happened. What we saw when we got home, though, is a different story. Michelle hooked the video camera up to the television and played our footage. At first, it looked like nothing interesting, until there was a point when I coughed. I had just gotten over a bad cold. Right after that, a heavy whispering breath followed. It was not me. Michelle, Aaron, and I looked at each other with wide eyes, and we turned back to the television. The other two saw a bright ball of light flash by the screen for a second, but I didn't. As I recorded us driving back to the main road, I faced the rolled-up window, as everyone does, not thinking that spirits can go through such things. I was just looking towards the field that was supposed to have been turned into a camp. I had the infrared light on the camera in case something moved in the field, and nothing did. Instead, we saw a face pressed up against the window, and no, it was not my reflection. The small screen of the video camera did not project enough light, and I was not pressed up against the window. When the three of us saw this, we screamed, and Michelle's mother started yelling at us. We ran into her room and told her what had happened, and she scorned us, but she would not watch the footage. Another little tidbit that we saw. In the rearview mirror, there were two stationary lights in the upper corners. This area where Boy Scout Lane is away from the city limits, and no car was behind us. The lights did not leave until we got deep into town again. We haven't gone out there since, but we have shown the tape to others, and they see the same things. I don't know if Boy Scouts really haunt that area, but something does. I live in Stevens Point now, and this town has a lot of history to it. Anything is possible, and it just makes me more of a believer. Thing at Scout Camp, submitted by Flembottom. I grew up in scouting with my older brother, and my father was even our scoutmaster for a bit when one of the guys in charge found out he was really bad at it. I'd gone through Cub Scouts, Weeblos, and did make it to my Eagle, and my brother dropped out after a couple of years. It just wasn't his bag. There were a couple of summer camps in my area, and we would go out to those for events in the summers and winters. We always had a blast out there. I know a lot of people make fun of scouting, and believe me, yeah, there are problems that really do exist, but our troop was always above that shit. We had gay guys in our troop, and no one cared, and this was in the 90s too, so really in the controversial time of what was going on. Anyway, there was this one trip that everyone wanted to do in the winter, and it was a weekend of outdoor stuff at a site a little off the beaten path. It was on a scout campground, but it was at the far edge of it, and you really had to hike out there, or snowshoe for that matter. So, a bunch of guys in our patrol signed up for a weekend, and there were like 3 dads with the 5 of us, and we were going to go, so 8 in total. We arrived at the campground Friday afternoon with just enough light to get out to the site, pitch tents, and gather wood for a fire and cooking. It was about 3 when we got out there, and everyone was bouncing around and excited to try this out. I guess we were around 13 and 16, so you know how kids are. None of us had ever camped outside in snow before. We'd always stayed in cabins and such. So we all had cold weather gear, and man, we needed it. It was cold that weekend, and while we were prepared, if you've ever camped in winter, it's still cold no matter how you slice it. After things were set up, we had to review the checklist of activities we had to do in order to complete the weekend and get credit for it. Working together, we got a ton of wood for a reflector fire, and some of the guys got stuff ready for dinner. As the sun fell, we were all in a great mood. The fire was going, food was getting prepped, and everyone was enjoying the camaraderie and fellowship of scouting. 2 of my friends, I'll call them Jimmy and Chris, were in charge of building the latrine a little ways into the woods for privacy. They set things up so that when you had to go, no one would be able to see you doing your business. When they came back to our site, they had a weird look on their faces. Jimmy's dad noticed something was wrong and asked him if everything was okay, and they both nodded but didn't say anything. Later, after dinner, I saw Jimmy talking to his dad off to the side, and his father was kind of smirking. We both pulled cleanup duty, so when we were away from the patrol, I asked him what was up. He looked at me and said, "Dad thinks it's nothing, but Chris and I saw something weird out in the forest. Don't laugh, but it looked like a really hairy guy." I blurted out, "Like Bigfoot?" with a smile, and he just said, "Dude, seriously, we're not kidding. It was weird." I asked him some more about it, and he just said that it was way back in the trees, and they couldn't see it perfectly, but I guess whatever it was just stared at them and then walked away. I didn't want to be a total dick, so I just said, maybe it was just some lost hiker, and I left it at that. Inside, I thought he was seeing things, but who knows, right? Back then, I didn't know much about Bigfoot in that area, but it's actually a pretty common thing, I came to find out. There were lots of reports about it all over the state, and even a couple in the area that we were in. We finished up, sat around the fire and told some stories, and then wrapped it up for the night. In the middle of the night, I woke up because I heard some whispering coming from the tent next to me. It was Jimmy's dad talking to my dad. I heard the sound of a zipper and more whispering, and then I hear my dad say in a loud tone, "Hey, who are you? What do you want?" And then silence. "If you're looking for trouble, you're going to get it," said Jimmy's dad, and then they went back to talking in low tones to one another. Of course, this woke everyone up, but they just said they saw a deer or something on the edge of the woods and wanted to scare it away. Now, I know we were just kids, but I'm sure all of us were thinking, why would you talk to a deer like that? Well, we all just went back to sleep. The next morning, we all got up for breakfast and the day's activities, and that's when Jimmy, Chris, and I followed our dads over to the woods as they were looking around for something. They saw it, and so did we. There were footprints in the snow, like human footprints, not wearing any boots. They turned to us and said to get going with our challenges for the day, and we did. But of course we immediately told the other guys what we had seen. Jimmy's dad started off on his snowshoes back to the main lodge, and I was assuming to say something to someone about a barefoot guy hanging around the outpost. We got immersed in the checklist of things we had to do, including making a fire with no matches and cooking a hot lunch, and pretty soon it was getting towards dark again. My other friend, I'll call Richie, went to go to the bathroom and came back running. His face was white as a sheet. He said there was a hairy man standing out in the woods, reddish-brown hair all over him, and it freaked him out really bad. The dads ran into the woods, and I heard my dad yell out, "Hey, you! Get out of here!" They came back, and once again Jimmy's dad went to the lodge. He had called the camp director and the police and told them something strange was going on out there. They told us that we should leave if we felt threatened, but we didn't really know what to make of any of this, and honestly, as a kid, it was pretty exciting to think Bigfoot was real. So, we hunkered down later for an evening, and after talking about it a lot, Jimmy's dad told us to knock it off. It was probably just a local guy trying to have some fun with us. That's when we heard this strange cry. Kind of like an elk, but with a really deep voice, not a high-pitched one. It just kind of rose and dropped, and we all looked into the night sky wondering what it was. I've looked up those calls on YouTube, and like I said, it was a lot deeper, but it kind of came and went like those elk do. That's when I had to go to the bathroom, but there was no fucking way I was going into the woods after I heard that cry, so I just went to the edge of the firelight and took a pee. The cry came again, this time a lot louder, and all the dads looked at one another and didn't say anything. We wrapped things up again and did some cleanup as we would be leaving right after breakfast the next morning to get home to church. So, sleepily but still a little revved up, we went into our sleeping bags whispering about what that sound was. At about 3 a.m., I heard footsteps in the snow around our camp area and immediately figured it was one of the dads checking things out. I had to pee again, I guess too much hot chocolate, so I unzipped the tent and was just going to go around the edge of it to take my leak. I did, and when I looked at the edge of the woods, there it was, a little darker than the darkness of the trees, a massive, hairy-looking man. I stood frozen staring at it. It was huge, had to be at least 7 feet tall, and I knew right away this was not some local guy having fun with us. We kind of stared at each other for a minute, and then I heard footsteps behind me. "Get the hell out of here, whoever you are! Just get out!" Jimmy's dad was yelling at the thing. It just stood there for a minute, and then kind of faded back into the trees, crunching the branches and stuff on its way. Of course, everyone was now awake, and the dads pulled the plug. They told us all to get ready to hike. We'd come back and get the tents and stuff in the daylight. We did as we were told and made the walk back to the main lodge, crunching on the cold snow in our snowshoes. Every once in a while, since I was in the rear, I'd stop and listen, and I swear there was something in the woods just out of sight following us all the way back. Turns out, there was something out there walking after us as we went to the lodge. When the police showed up the next day, they found a trail of footprints in the trees, just out of eyesight. The next day we went back for our gear, and that was the last I saw or ever heard of that thing. Some people might laugh at this story, but that really happened. Whatever it was, it didn't hurt us, but who knows what might have happened if it decided to get aggressive. It was huge. I was in Scouts for a few more years after my Eagle, and I spent a lot more time out at that campground. No one else I ever came in contact with that camped out there had had an experience like we did. Many years later, I searched around on the internet and found some reports that something like this was reported frequently just about a half hour away from the campground. But, as far as I know, it never made an appearance at that camp again. A Boy Scout story, submitted by Stephen the Blue. This is a little bit different, but was scary as F when it happened. I was 10 years old attending a scout camp in 1979. I won't name the place, but I'll let you know that it is in Massachusetts. It was and is a cool place for kids to go camping, but the time that I was there that August, I got more than I bargained for. We all did. It was a Friday and the next to the last day of my week there. It started out fairly normal, but gray and a little windy. It made for a rotten day on the lake as far as boating and swimming. But we were all trying to make the best of our last full day there before heading home. There were guys all over the place finishing up merit badge requirements and such, and I was with 3 of my buddies out in the woods finishing a wildlife observation for my mammals badge. Honestly, I think we were just making up stuff to meet the qualifications and probably planning on taking a long nap out in the woods. I remember it got really dark really fast, and the wind started to pick up even more. My friend Larry said we should probably head for shelter as it looked like a pretty serious storm was coming. And then it hit. The rain was intense and some of the heaviest I recall ever in my life. After reminiscing about this day with my friends, we all kind of remember it a little differently, and with time, it's hard to know what version of the story is the most accurate. Hey, I'm in my 50s now, and things are getting foggy. Anyway, we started hightailing it back to the campsites, and there were scout leaders trying to get everyone organized and accounted for, when suddenly I heard what sounded like a train coming at us. Not a whistle or whatever, but just this loud wall of sound. Scouts were running around looking to get to buildings as it was obvious what was happening at this point. Larry, Jeff, and I crawled under our canvas tent platform, and we could see other guys in our troop doing the same thing. The sound got louder and louder, and we could hear trees cracking and breaking, and stuff was flying all over the place. I buried my face to the dirt to protect it from the little rocks and sticks that were zooming through the air, but I did look up for 1 second to see 3 tents across from us go shooting off into the woods with the cots and everything else inside. I also remember seeing the bodies of my pals lying under the platforms like us. The sound of the tornado was so deafening I thought my ears were going to burst, and we just lay there, holding on and hoping we were going to be okay. In what seemed like forever, but was really probably just a couple of minutes, things died down, but the rain kept up and we could still hear the creak and crack of the trees and such. Then the yelling started. Campers crying, some of them hurt by flying debris, and others just really shook up. We crawled out from under the platforms and just stood there kind of dazed. The tornado hadn't come right through our sight, but it came close enough to knock everything all over the place, and it was a total mess. No one in our troop was hurt that bad. In fact, I recall some guys getting extra credit on their first aid merit badges as they went into action helping others out when they retrieved their first aid kits. Our scoutmaster, Mr. Taylor, tallied up everyone, and everyone in our troop was accounted for and safe. Larry and Jeff and I were just still totally dazed, and I guessed everyone else was too. 2 guys in another troop, however, didn't make it. They were killed by falling trees and had unfortunately been right in the path of the tornado. When we learned about this, parents were called and everyone was going home or leaving for medical treatment if they needed it. The really scary thing is, the tornado cut right through a portion of the forest where we had been sitting looking for squirrels and whatever. I mean, if we had been out there for even a minute or 2 more, I'm positive we never would have made it out of there alive. Those 2 poor kids. It was so sad. I remember we had their names and there was some sort of tribute to them. But again, like so much else, all of it has faded. I'd be lying if I said I was friends with them, but I do know we all saw them throughout the week and such. And so sad. Just kids and wiped off the map, just like that. People say it over and over that real-world stuff is always scarier than the paranormal. I've seen a lot of stuff I can't explain over the years. But that by far was the scariest thing I have ever been through. If you've never heard a tornado up close, it's unreal and so loud, you really have to hear it for yourself just to understand how intense it is. They say that campground still has those 2 kids as ghost campers, and people see them from time to time. I never went back and left scouts not long after that. Hands down, a terrifying day. Uncle Josh here, gang. This story sounded sort of familiar, and I did some digging after some initial questions to the author. I have heard this one before because my oldest cousin was there when this happened. He was actually at the same campground with this guy. I remember my cousin talking about it when I was a kid, and I'd totally forgotten it until now. I haven't talked to that cousin in quite some time, but he did confirm it was intense. So, no, the author and my cousin don't know each other or remember one another, if you guys were thinking that. As for the digging, I found a story in a section of the internet that I don't always go because I'm not always sure about the veracity of some of the stories, but I'm going to share this one because it does sound legit. So enjoy. It's kind of like a second part to that story. The Tornado Boys by Anonymous. I used to work at a summer camp in Rutland, Massachusetts called Treasure Valley in 2011. It was a camp for Boy Scouts, and I was a counselor at the waterfront. For the most part, Treasure Valley is within a large forest next to a decent-sized body of water called Browning Pond, but there is a clearing in these woods. The clearing starts out fairly wide and then narrows down into a path. The start of the clearing is known as Boonesville Plains. Treasure Valley has quite a few campsites, and each campsite has their own name and accommodates a different troop. Troops are basically a gathering of scouts from a specific place, and the camp welcomed many troops at a time. Some of the camp names included Baden-Powell, Evergreen, Chippewa, and Sleepy Hollow. The troops cycled in every week. We would have one group of troops for week 1, another for week 2, and so on. For the last few weeks, we couldn't get as many troops, and I wondered why that was. Maybe people felt the staff was more eager near the beginning. Maybe troops respected that their scouts needed to prepare for school in those last few weeks. I'm not sure. However, this would leave campsites empty. Each campsite had about 6 canvas tents, and these canvas tents were set on wooden platforms that were usually 10 feet by 12 feet. Secured to the sides of the platforms were outriggers, and these, as well as a pole in the middle, kept the canvas suspended above the platforms. I loved working with the scouts and the adult leaders. I became somewhat of a celebrity amongst them, and that's what happens to counselors. Oftentimes, troops will invite you to campfires to engage in storytelling, perform skits, or just enjoy conversation around the fire. Sometimes a troop has a special tradition that was specific to their troop only. I was invited to a fire at a campsite called Proctor. It was already getting dark out when I left what I referred to as Staff Row. The staff campsite was actually called Evergreen, I believe. I walked there by myself, which is not something you should do at scout camp. I mean, in Boy Scouts, the buddy system is crucial, and it was my role to be a good example. Nonetheless, I thought, well, I'm old enough. I don't need to drag anyone along. If you're looking at the camp, there's a road loop, the main road, and Ridge Road. The loop connects most of the campsites. Ridge Road was infamous for being rocky as hell, so I decided to take as much of the main road as I could. The sky was still somewhat pale, so I didn't think to bring a flashlight, though I pride myself on being able to get by without one at times. I walked up towards the main gate and past the archery range to get to Proctor, so up and around. We had a good time. They had the fire roaring when I arrived, and they were so glad I came. We roasted marshmallows, but they didn't have materials for s'mores, and the scouts bragged to me about what they did that day and what they learned from the other counselors. One of them painted a log to look like a zombie leg in their art class, and I was there until the fire was nothing but glowing coals, talking to one of the scoutmasters and 2 scouts. I told them that I should get going and told them to have a good night. As soon as I reconnected with the road, internally I think to myself, shit, it is really dark out, and I have no light source. And of course, I don't have a buddy who has a flashlight either. The weather was calm, the sky was black, still and cool. I stay put and think about my best option for a minute. The way I came was pitch black, but the remainder of the loop I have yet to travel that night was a tad bit lighter because of the clearing nearby. So I began to take the light path. I passed campsite Tall Maples, but as soon as I passed campsite Hickory, I began to feel uneasy. I've never felt like this with anything before, but it's a feeling that makes you suspect that even the trees are watching you. Campsite Sleepy Hollow was to my right, and there wasn't a troop there this week, but there was a faint light coming from one of the tents. This tent was the tent closest to the road, and no one should have been there, especially at that hour. It was probably a scout or two being a rebel, I thought. I'll just tell them to get back to their campsite. So I walked closer to the tent, but something inside me screamed for me not to. "Hey, you're not supposed to be here. You're not in trouble, but you just need to get back to your campsite," I said at normal volume. I saw the light move and even heard steps coming my way from within the tent on the wooden platform. The steps were slow, and I approached the tent to lift up the flap to help guide the scout out of the tent. As soon as I lifted the flap, I heard a really loud creak followed by a thundering snap. Wind blew very forcefully out of the tent at me. I dropped to the ground backwards. I gathered myself up and tripped my way to Boonesville Plains. When I looked back, the light was gone. The following day, I was talking to some of the other counselors. "Does the road around Sleepy Hollow give anyone else a sinking feeling?" I asked. "I was walking around there last night." That's all I said. I didn't think the group needed to know what I had experienced. You know scouts died there, right?" my friend said to me. I knew a tornado had come through at some point, but I didn't know it killed anyone. In 1979, a tornado cleared a path in the forest at Treasure Valley, killing 2 Boy Scouts in the process. I looked into it online, and I found out that it's not that uncommon to see those 2 scouts on Ridge Road. People refer to them as the Tornado Boys. The Mysterious Scout by Nairflare 5. The best and most frightening years of my childhood was at a particular Boy Scout camp about 100 miles from my home in Mississippi. It was me and 10 of my fellow campers and our super dorky and bipolar Boy Scouts troop leader, Mr. Beard. We all rode in a small rented school bus from our headquarters all the way to the very wooded and very humid camp. I later found out that the mega-huge campsite was named after a very peaceful old man who contributed a lot to the place before he died from an apparent suicide in his log cabin home, just a few miles from the campground. Anyway, once we arrived, we hiked all our belongings several miles into the hot, humid, and sticky-ass forest until we reached our lodging destination. Our first night of camp began with a joyous campfire, and goofy scary stories, roasted ham sandwiches, and finally some shut-eye. Later that night, I would experience a sight and brief encounter of a lost spirit that still gives me chills to this day. It was around 2 a.m, and I was just really bad at holding piss, so I got up, grabbed my flashlight, and quietly left my group to find a nice spot in the dark. As I slowly made my way down the crooked trail into the woods, an apparition of a young kid with a similar-looking Boy Scout uniform appeared a few inches away from me. I was struck with utter shock, but I couldn't resist the urge to try to communicate with this ghost or whatever it was, despite my temporary circumstances. He had a very lost look on his ghostly young face, and a desire to be clearly understood by my frightened soul. Believe it or not, we talked, and according to our very brief, yet memorable conversation, he told me that a long time ago he was accidentally left by his troop leader and team of scouts, and he died trying to search for them. Died of heat exhaustion, alone, in the woods. It can be dangerous out there. Submitted by Grandpa Joe Sucks. Thanks for asking for Scout Stories. I'm hoping this one will work for you, and I haven't told it to anybody in a long time. I was a scout in Florida when I was in middle and high school. I think I was a tenderfoot or something at the time, and some of the guys in my troop were all working on the same merit badges, and we thought we'd kill a couple with one stone on an overnight in my friend's backyard. Well, really the forest land that ran behind and around it. He lived on the edge of a drying swamp, but there was nothing for miles, just trees and stuff around his dead-end street. Dave, Colin, and I were working on camping and cooking badges, but Ryan had already had his and was working on birding or something like that, which we all thought was hilarious. At our troop meeting, we asked our scoutmaster about it, and he said he'd call our fathers to see how they felt about it. Not that he didn't think we'd lie to him about anything, he was just being a good leader. He was a great guy and really took the time to get to know all of us and include our families on the stuff we did. I heard he passed away not too long ago, which is a shame. He was a really nice guy. But back to the story. Our parents were all cool as long as we didn't go too far into the tree land, and Colin's father would check on us at night to make sure we were okay. We planned for a Saturday night 2 weeks from the time we were given permission, and then worked on all the other things you have to with merit badges, like the plans and sharing them with our counselor. Colin and his father had gone out into the tree land, and about 2 miles out, they found a great spot for us. Part of merit badges that sound easy like camping and cooking actually have a lot of qualifications, such as how far you need to hike or making shopping lists and going shopping for the supplies. Everything has to be checked off or you don't get the merit badge. They are kind of involved for 13-year-old kids, but that's part of it. Just writing that in case anybody didn't know. So we met at Colin's house that Saturday morning and got all of our gear together. It was only for one night and morning, so we got to travel pretty light. We also planned to sleep under the stars, so no pitching of tents on this trip, and we loved the idea of skipping that step just this one time. Our parents checked over all of our things, made sure we had one cell phone. This was 2004, not every kid had one like today. Ryan had his mother's. They gave us the okay, and off we went on the route Colin and his father had picked out. I remember lots of laughing and talking about baseball, hot girls, and stuff, and we were all excited to be hanging together and having good old-fashioned clean fun. When we got to the spot, we did everything by the numbers, as our scoutmaster used to say. We got a fire pit ready after clearing out the brush, laid out our sleeping pads and bags, made a raised table for cooking and prep out of some dead logs, and were just telling jokes and laughing the whole time. When we got everything set up, we went exploring around the area for anything cool to see. Colin said there used to be a pond out there that had dried up, and Ryan wanted to check out the bird life. Armed with only our Swiss Army knives, we headed out to find this pond. After a bit of walking through the trees, we came to what looked like an old path. It certainly didn't look very used. Grass had grown up tall between the 2 tire track trails, and Colin thought that it led to the pond, but he wasn't totally sure. He got out his compass and looked around and said that we had to go in a direction away from our little camp. So we did. Sure enough, we came upon it, but of course there's not too much a pond that's dried up. It's not very exciting. There was, however, an old beat-up pickup truck that Colin did not remember ever being out there before. It was a rusted-out junker with the windows broken out, the tires were flat, seats all slashed up. You get the picture. What was odd to us, though, was a newer toolbox we found under a tarp in the back of the truck. It was one of those toolboxes that goes along the whole front of the box under the cab window. Dave and I tried to open it, but it was locked. I thought it was odd that a new toolbox would be in the back of a crappy old truck, and Colin said nobody ever really was out this way. There was no reason to be. It was just trees, dried swampy land, and some animals, and not really hunting animals either. What should we do? Asked Ryan. Should we tell someone that it's out here? What for? Asked Dave. Let's try to pry it open. Maybe there's something cool inside. I said I didn't think that was such a good idea, and Ryan brought up our scout oath and stuff. Right, save the comments, listeners. We were good kids. Colin agreed with Dave, and the two got to looking for rocks or whatever to try to break into the locks. Genius thinking. It wasn't like they were padlocks. So they found some rocks and started wailing away on the toolbox, and it was making a ton of noise. They didn't get anywhere. They just bashed the crap out of the box with no payday. And during a break in the senseless project, we heard voices. Deep voices. Guys, let's get out of here. Follow me, said Colin, and he started running across the dead pond to some trees. We all followed him and ran into them just as some guys came up the path towards the truck. There were 2 of them, and when they got to the truck, they looked around. If it was their truck, they would obviously see that someone had been out there messing with things. The tarp was still on the ground, and the smash marks on the toolbox were dead giveaways. We overheard one of them say,
"Son of a bitch, look at this,"
as he pointed to the toolbox. Ryan had his binoculars for bird watching and was watching them as we hid. One of the guys opened the box and started taking stuff out, as the other guy kept looking around the area. "I can't see them really well. What are they doing?" I whispered, and Ryan said they were taking out bags of something, and he said they both had guns. That's not very atypical for Florida. Everybody has guns down here. But Colin said we needed to get out of there and said he would take us away from the pond, and then we could work our way around them at a far distance so they wouldn't see us. The best laid plans, right? As soon as we started moving back into the trees, of course we made way too much noise, and both the guys heard us and yelled things out like,
"Hey, get back here!"
We really started booking it. I looked back once and could see one of the guys was chasing us, but we just kept running. I don't know how we did it, but we got back to the camp and just crashed in a giant pile, covered in sweat and dirt from the run. It was summer and hey, Florida weather, right? We sat there drinking water and talking about what had just happened. We said maybe Ryan should call for help, and we kicked that around. What for? I mean, those guys would be long gone, and we might get in trouble for trying to break into the toolbox. So we all just kind of relaxed and decided to just focus on our badge stuff, and if anyone asked, we didn't know anything about a truck. So much for the scout oath. Just before nightfall, Colin's father came out to check on us and stay for dinner we were going to cook. Ryan basked in the glory of not having to do anything as he had already had the badges I mentioned, and we all gave him a hard time for not pitching in. We were trying to play it cool in front of Colin's father. He finally left, told us to be safe, and then we just gathered around the fire for more talking and stuff. Around 11 o'clock, Dave was telling some dirty jokes when he stopped and pointed his chin to the edge of our little camp. We all turned and looked, and there was a guy just standing there staring at us. I'm pretty sure we almost all soiled our britches when the guy came over to us in the firelight. He was scraggly looking with really long, greasy hair. He was wearing work boots and camo shorts with no shirt, and he was all sweaty and dirty.
"Hey guys, having a camp out?"
he asked, or something like that. He was smiling, but his eyes were looking at us a little too intensely. I, for one, was really uneasy. Yeah, scout stuff, said Colin, and we all nodded.
"No kidding. I was a scout once."
The guy just said that and kept staring.
"You guys been doing any walking and exploring around out here? That can be dangerous, you know."
We all just looked at him, and in my heart, I knew that this guy had to be one of the guys from the truck, and he knew that we were the ones that had been out there. Ryan jumped in saying, "Nah, we've all been busy doing scout stuff over here. Ever see a table built like that?" And he pointed to the cooktop that we'd built.
"Mm-hmm,"
said the guy.
"Well, if I were you, I'd stick to scout stuff, if you know what I mean. And you know what I mean. Ain't that right, Cable?"
The other names in the story I've changed, but that one I haven't, because I will never forget it. This other guy comes into the firelight from behind us, and this guy is really scary looking. He's dressed in camo too, but he's got a gun on his hip and blood on his hands and arms.
"Yep, can be real dangerous out here,"
he said. And with that, he dropped 4 dead squirrels on the ground and gave us a hard stare. He held up 3 fingers in a scout salute and repeated,
"I do solemnly swear, it can get even more dangerous."
We didn't say anything. The 2 guys looked at one another and then just walked away into the darkness. That was it for us. Ryan scrambled for his phone and we called Colin's father. Torn between running into the night or staying put, we were happy to hear that Colin's father says to stay there. He was actually on his way back out to check on us again. We all breathed a sigh of relief that Dave's father was with him too. When they got to our camp, we all started talking at once and told them the whole story. To our surprise, they weren't really that mad. I mean, after all, it's not like we were trying to rob a bank or something. They stayed with us that night, and in the morning, they called the sheriffs and told them our story. In less than an hour, 2 came up on quads and asked us a bunch of questions, like what the guys looked like, what did the truck look like, where was it, and stuff. As a group, we went back to the truck, and they told us to stay put away from it, and then went over to it. They inspected things and talked to each other, and one came back to us and said, "You boys got real lucky. This is some sort of stash for drug dealers, and I suggest you use your common sense next time and stay away from strange trucks." They asked the 2 fathers to come talk to them off to the side, and on our way home, they mentioned something about there being residues from pot, cocaine, and meth in the toolbox. Later, drug dogs would find another stash in a tree not too far away. We really dodged a bullet there, and we promised each other to stick to scoutcraft if we went out camping again. That brush with the 2 scary drug dealers was enough to scare us out of that for good. I miss scouts, but I gotta say I'm kind of happy. I've got twin daughters who have zero interest in the outdoors, and for that, I'm kind of thankful. I'm sure they'll find their share of trouble on their own, but at least it won't be something like how we found it. Hey gang, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode of True Scary Stories. Thanks to everyone who sent in submissions in such a short time. Usually I ask for a couple of weeks advance, but I got some and said, you know what, I'm running with this. Also, I'd like to welcome my newest Patreon, Brenda. Thank you very much for your patronage. If you're interested in becoming a patron, go to my website, truescarystories.net, and click on the button that says support. If you do have a cool story that you'd like me to narrate, send it off. I've got a couple in the kitty, so Christina, I've got yours. Karen, I've got yours as well. And Charmaine, look for yours coming up real soon too. If you haven't done so, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel, and make sure you click on the notification button. Also, follow me on social media. I'll do my best to follow you as well. All the links for that are in the description below. Thanks again for listening, everybody. Be excellent to each other. And until next time, remember, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.